tale did not commence in a grand auditorium, nor amid the tumult of global politics, but in a quiet, almost intimate moment behind closed doors. Two of the world's most scrutinized leaders sat across from each other. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, Africa's youngest head of state, known for his fearless defiance of Western influence and steadfast devotion to God, faced Xi Jinping, the long-tenured leader of China, molded by a political system where God is seldom mentioned, and religious belief is often seen as a liability. Officially, the meeting was intended to cover topics like cooperation, trade, and the evolving dynamics of global power. Yet as hours slipped by and the conversation drifted beyond mere policy, Traoré leaned forward, his gaze burning with a composed intensity, and asked a question no one had dared voice to Xi directly. "President Xi," he began softly, "I have studied your speeches, your writings, your policies. You are admired as a disciplined strategist, a builder of China's modern era. Yet there is something I must ask. Why do you not acknowledge God? Why has a nation with such rich heritage and ancient wisdom removed him from the center of its life?" The silence that followed was profound. For Xi, a lifetime spent within a political structure shaped by atheism, queries about God were not merely intellectual, they were perilous. And yet, here was a 36-year-old African soldier turned leader, unafraid to voice what millions quietly pondered. What does Xi truly believe? Xi reclined slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Traoré, weighing whether this question was naive or daringly bold. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "You see, President Traoré," Xi began slowly, "faith is a complex matter in China. My people endured centuries of emperors, dynasties, invasions, and humiliation at the hands of the West. The Communist Revolution demanded that our trust be placed not in gods or heaven, but in ourselves, our people, and our party. God became a distraction. Religion was exploited by invaders to weaken and divide us, to force submission. We replaced him with loyalty to the collective, to the state. That is how we rebuilt China." His tone was calm, deliberate, and logical. Yet Traoré remained unconvinced. He leaned in, his voice firmer now. "I understand history, President Xi," he said. "I know the wounds of nations exploited, just as Africa has been. But tell me this. If you remove God, what fills the spirit of a nation? If people are told there is no higher power above the party, no eternal truth beyond ideology, then who defines right and wrong? Is it not perilous to replace the Almighty with fallible, temporary humans?" Xi's lips tightened, yet he did not recoil. "Your words reflect faith, and I respect that," Xi replied. "But for us, survival came before belief. A starving child does not care for heaven. He craves food. A nation under siege does not pray for angels, it builds armies. By removing God, we removed weakness. We chose order, strength, unity, and it worked. Look at China today, stronger than ever, resilient against the same West that subjugated Africa. Does that not prove our path correct?" Traoré paused, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. The air seemed thick with tension. Beyond the walls, the world continued unaware, while inside, faith and ideology clashed. God versus man, eternal truth versus human authority. Yet Traoré did not retreat. "You are right, survival is vital," he said. "Bread, shelter, protection are essential. But survival without purpose is hollow. A full stomach with an empty soul remains hungry. Roads, factories, armies, they are only temporary. When men die, what endures? Does your party promise eternal life? Does ideology satisfy the deep yearning in every human heart? President Xi, you may reject God, but God does not reject you. No nation, no matter how mighty, can thrive on human power alone." For the first time, Xi's demeanor shifted. His fingers drummed lightly on the table. Ideology, his lifelong armor, seemed tested by Traoré's words. Finally, his voice softened, reflective. "You speak as if every person needs God," Xi said quietly. "But consider this, millions in China live without him and still find contentment. They place faith in family, work, discipline. Why complicate life with an unseen deity?" Traoré's eyes blazed. "Truth is not measured by what is visible. Happiness built on sand collapses in a storm. Meaning without God is like a riverbed without water, dry and empty. China is strong, yes, but strength without humility breeds pride, and pride always leads to downfall. The West thought itself invincible, yet it falters. Without God, even the mightiest empires crumble. Again, silence filled the room. Two leaders, both powerful, both resolute, measured each other's words. She, who had confronted countless political battles, now appeared unsettled, not by policy, but by faith. Treading further, Traoré continued. "Young man," she addressed him with a tone of rare reflection, "you remind me of something China lost long ago. Belief, conviction, a guiding anchor beyond survival. Perhaps you are right. There may be a power beyond the state. Yet tell me, if God is real, why has Africa suffered so? Why do nations that worship still endure weakness, division, exploitation?" Traoré did not hesitate. Belief does not erase suffering. It gives it purpose. Africa's trials prove not the absence of God, but the consequences of straying from His path. Today we rise not by arms alone, but with faith. Imagine if China with its strength, and Africa with its faith united, not replacing God, but serving Him. That could transform the world. Xi's eyes narrowed, not in defense this time, but contemplation. Silence spoke volumes. The dialogue, intended for politics, had entered the realm of eternity. Xi, guided by decades of ideology dismissing God, now faced a young African leader's unwavering clarity and courage. The words sank deep, stirring reflections long buried. Slowly he acknowledged, "You speak boldly, President Traoré. But tell me, how do you reconcile faith with governance? Placing God above politics risks authority. Do you not fear division when interpretations differ?" Traoré leaned forward, steady and unwavering. Authority without God becomes tyranny. Faith invites division, yes, but it also fosters dialogue and growth. I govern accountable to Him, not to power alone. My people follow because they see I submit to something greater than myself. That is the difference. She listened, tapping the table lightly. China's history with religion is vast: temples, sages, philosophies. But the revolution demanded self-reliance. Many saw hope in that. I cannot simply tell my people to believe in God. It may appear betrayal. Traoré nodded. I do not ask betrayal, only liberation from limits of human design. Survival and prosperity are essential, but not the purpose of life. Build cities, armies, they prepare for graves. Awaken the spirit, and humanity prepares for eternity. Concrete alone cannot nourish a nation's soul. Xi's stern mask softened. You speak with fire, young man, perhaps I envy it. But if God is so powerful, why permit colonization? Why allow humiliation? Why do believers suffer while others prosper? Traoré answered firmly, it is free will. God granted men freedom, to build or destroy, to love or hate, to serve or enslave. Misuse is human, not divine. Judgment may be delayed, but Africa rises with faith. China rose with discipline. Imagine both, guided by God, not mere ambition. That is destiny. Xi exhaled, curiosity replacing defense. And you believe Africa carries such destiny? Traoré replied immediately, yes, despite suffering, faith endures. While some worship power, Africa prays. While some bow to wealth, Africa bows to God. The future belongs to those who maintain faith. Strength lies in spirit, not only armies. The first part of their conversation ended in silence, mutual respect binding two leaders from worlds apart. Politics had given way to truths transcending time and power. After a long pause, the atmosphere remained heavy. President Xi Jinping, usually composed and decisive, now seemed to carry the weight of reflection. For years, his life had been guided by ideology, discipline, and a worldview that dismissed God as superstition. Yet before him sat a young African leader, half his age, speaking with a clarity and conviction that few scholars, diplomats, or philosophers had dared present. Finally, Xi broke the silence. You have challenged me in ways I did not anticipate, he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. Perhaps survival alone is insufficient. But China is vast, its history fraught, and its pride immense. Change does not happen overnight, yet your words have given me something to ponder. Maybe one day, China will rediscover what it has lost. Traoré smiled, not in triumph, but with hope. I do not ask for promises, President Xi, only that you seek within yourself. A man who finds God does not lose power. He gains peace. A nation that rediscovers God does not lose strength. It gains purpose. For a few moments, silence enveloped the room again. Two leaders from contrasting worlds, one forged through revolution, the other through faith, sat in contemplation, their dialogue echoing truths far beyond politics. What followed would largely remain unseen by the public, but witnesses would later describe the subtle transformation. Xi walked away slower than usual, as if carrying not just the responsibilities of China, but the weight of eternity itself. Traoré returned to Africa, his heart aflame with conviction. He knew his mission was greater than defending Burkina Faso or challenging Western powers. It was to remind all leaders that without God, even empires falter, but with Him, even the seemingly weak can rise. That evening, in the privacy of his quarters, Traoré penned a note for his closest advisors. Man may conquer the earth, yet without God, he forfeits his soul. A leader without faith may command armies, but eternity remains beyond his reach. I have glimpsed the heart of China's leader, and I believe he too searches. The world does not need more empires. It needs truth, and truth belongs to God. The encounter between Ibrahim Traoré and Xi Jinping would become one of those rare, untold stories, hidden from public view, whispered among insiders. It was not merely a meeting of presidents. It was a collision of ideology and faith, of temporal power and eternal truth. And perhaps historians might one day look back and note that in that quiet room, a young African leader dared to question the very foundations of an empire, challenging the most powerful atheist to confront the questions of God. Traoré's vision extended beyond politics. He imagined a world where faith guided power rather than power shaping belief, where nations were not measured solely by wealth, armies, or infrastructure, but by the moral and spiritual integrity of their people. Strength without virtue leads to pride, and pride inevitably falls, he would later reflect. Even the mightiest civilizations collapse without the anchor of eternal truth. Xi, too, felt the stirrings of reflection. He thought of the centuries of Confucian teachings, of Buddha's guidance, of the philosophies that once nurtured his ancestors. All had emphasized balance, morality, and purpose, elements eclipsed by decades of enforced atheism. Traoré's words illuminated a gap he had long suppressed, the recognition that human strength alone could never satisfy the deeper hunger of the spirit. As the conversation lingered in Xi's mind, he replayed the young leader's arguments, the idea that survival and prosperity, while essential, are insufficient for the soul resonated deeply. The notion that meaningful existence required alignment with a higher power challenged everything he had been taught. Yet the logic was undeniable and the passion unyielding. It was a confrontation not with policy, but with eternity itself. Meanwhile, Traoré's message spread quietly among his inner circle. He emphasized that faith is not a weakness, but a source of resilience. Where others rely solely on human might, he explained, our strength derives from God. Empires may build walls, armies, and cities, but only the spirit can endure beyond the fleeting moment of history. He often reflected on the contrast between Africa and China, one rising with faith, the other with discipline. Each had its strengths and vulnerabilities, yet together he envisioned a partnership capable of reshaping global destiny. Not through domination, but through alignment with divine principles, through the fusion of spiritual integrity and worldly strategy. Imagine, he mused, what nations could achieve if power were tempered by God's wisdom rather than unchecked ambition. The conversation also forced Xi to confront uncomfortable truths. His pride, his nation's achievements, and his party's legacy were undeniable, but were they sufficient to withstand the tests of time? Traoré's unwavering belief in God and the enduring power of faith hinted at a dimension Xi had long ignored. Could strength and spirituality coexist? Could a nation rise not merely through human effort, but through divine alignment? The questions would haunt him long after the meeting ended. In Africa, Traoré's reflections inspired action. He urged leaders and citizens alike to recognize that power without purpose is hollow, that progress without morality is fragile, and that nations thrive only when guided by enduring principles beyond mere survival. Our victories are incomplete, he often said, if they neglect the eternal. Empires may endure for centuries, yet without God, they are like a castle built on sand. Xi, privately, began to reconsider his own framework. Though he could not yet publicly embrace faith, the seeds of doubt and contemplation had been planted. Traoré's courage had shown that even the mightiest, when confronted with truth, must reckon with questions they long ignored. Leadership, it seemed, was not merely about ruling the present, but understanding the eternal consequences of decisions, the unseen spiritual currents that shape the fate of nations. The encounter between these two leaders became emblematic, not for what was publicly announced, but for the profound dialogue that unfolded. A young African president had dared to speak of God in the face of overwhelming power, and a seasoned Chinese leader for the first time had allowed himself to ponder the questions that ideology had long silenced. Faith and power, spirit and strategy, eternal truth and worldly ambition. The meeting revealed that leadership is more than governance. It is stewardship of both the temporal and the eternal. In the months that followed, the lessons of that conversation subtly influenced policy, thought, and reflection. Xi remained steadfast publicly, yet privately, the dialogue weighed on him, prompting reconsideration of priorities and purpose. Traoré, meanwhile, continued his work in Africa with renewed vigor, his vision unshaken. Nations guided by faith, grounded in principle, and empowered by God could withstand any force, challenge any empire, and endure the test of time. The story of that quiet meeting would remain largely hidden from the world, but for those who knew, it became a symbol of courage, conviction, and the power of asking questions that matter. In a world obsessed with immediate power and tangible success, Traoré had reminded everyone present, and perhaps even the most powerful in China, that true strength lies in faith, that the soul of a nation is as important as its armies, and that God's guidance is a foundation no human might can replace. Even years later, insiders would whisper of the day when two leaders, shaped by entirely different worlds, engaged not in politics, but in a discourse that touched eternity. Xi, tempered by experience, confronted the limits of ideology. Traoré, inspired by belief, revealed that even the seemingly powerless could challenge the most formidable empires with nothing but truth and faith. And though the details remain largely unknown, the impact of that dialogue continues to ripple, silently shaping decisions, guiding leaders, and reminding the world that while empires rise and fall, the truth of God endures. As Traoré reflected on that night, he wrote in his journal, "Empires may conquer land, but without God they cannot claim the soul. Leaders may command armies, but they cannot govern eternity. Faith is the compass, and in its light, nations find true strength." In the end, the meeting had not merely been a political negotiation. It was a testament to the power of courage, conviction, and inquiry. A reminder that even the most entrenched systems of power must ultimately reckon with eternal questions. And perhaps one day the world would witness the fruits of that quiet confrontation, when nations, guided not solely by ambition, but by faith and divine wisdom, would chart a new course for humanity. And so, Ibrahim Traoré returned to Africa with his spirit ablaze, more convinced than ever that his mission was greater than any earthly empire. Not merely to defend his nation, but to awaken leaders and citizens alike to a truth long neglected. Kingdoms may rise and fall, but with God, even the smallest and weakest can ascend to greatness. Xi Jinping, in turn, carried a subtle but undeniable transformation, an awareness that even the most disciplined, the most powerful, and the most rational cannot escape the questions of eternity, and that perhaps one day, faith would find its place again, even in the heart of China.